Hello. Let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Professor Thomas Ridd. I'm a professor here at Science and Strategic Studies. On behalf of everybody, all of us here at the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies, I'd like to welcome you all. Welcome. Today it is my pleasure to welcome Peter Hultqvist. I practiced pronouncing this yesterday with my Swedish neighbors. He's the Swedish Minister of Defense, and we'll be talking about defense and security issues in the Baltic Sea today as part of our Dean's Forum. For over 70 years, SAIS has served as a platform for policymakers and students to engage on crucial issues of world politics. Today's event continues that tradition of dialogue, by bringing together leaders and practitioners in international security, policy, and business to share their experience with our students. So thank you again for coming. Minister Hultqvist has served as Swedish Minister of Defense since 2014 and is a member and part of the Executive Committee of the Swedish Social Democratic Party. And I understand we have several members of parliament here today from the Social Democratic Party, so welcome to all of you. Minister Hultqvist was elected to the Swedish Parliament in 2006 and serves as the group leader in the Parliamentary Committee on the Constitution, as well as chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Defense. Before Minister Hultqvist was elected to Parliament, he spent 17 years, I apologize, as a municipal commissioner in the county of Borlänge. And I'm German, by the way, so what you're hearing there is a German accent in Swedish, which is really quite confusing. And he began his career as a journalist. Please join me in welcoming Minister Hultqvist to the stage. If you like. So the way this will work today is Minister Hultqvist will not give a speech or something like that, but we will do a moderated conversation. And then after about 25 minutes or so, depending on how it goes, we'll open to the audience for question and answers. So I thought I'll start with a historic question, not least because before I joined SAIS, I had my office in a small little castle in southern Germany that was actually ransacked by the Swedes. So I'm particularly grateful to meet you here on neutral ground in the spirit of reconciliation. That was in 1633, I should add. But my historical question would be, how did the relationship historically between Sweden and Russia, and I think Russia is, when we talk about security and defense issues today, on everybody's mind, also here in the United States, especially here in the United States. So how does that complex history between Sweden and Russia influence Swedish defense policy or Swedish policy more generally vis-à-vis Russia today?
If we start with the situation after the Second World War, I think Russia or Soviet Union, as it would call during that time, had a real impact on the situation in Sweden and how we planned our defense organization. I think that the situation after the war, when Finland were forced to have some sort of agreement with Russia about how they agreement that were regulating the relationship between them and also intervened a lot in the Finnish society. Then we were in the middle and had as a basic platform as non-allied, and then we had Norway on the other side with their NATO membership. And that was the situation during the whole war, whole Cold War, that we were in the middle of that bridge. And I think that that was the wisest way to handle the situation in our part of Europe, because if we had during that time joined NATO. We also have had the Iron Curtain directly in the Baltic Sea, and then Finland, they have got big problems with the security situation, and I should not speculate what could happen there, but whole our defense organization also during this time was organized in a way that if something will happen, then we have to defend us.
Yeah.
So I can say that the Soviet Union and the policy during that years had a direct impact on how we organized defense in Sweden. And I think also today, when we are upgrading our military capabilities, that is a result of what's happened in Georgia and Ukraine with annexation of Crimea and a lot of other activities. Also this Swedish-Finnish cooperation that we have today in a very deep way, and it's also a result of a situation that we feel that we must do more together to have stabilization in our part of Europe. So I think that Russia or Soviet Union, the reality that we have all the time think around.
Mm-hmm. So the Cold War memory, would you think, is relatively recent and fresh and alive in Swedish collective memory? That certainly would be the case in Germany because of the division.
Yeah, I think that is a reality, and experience from that time also nowadays have an impact on what we are doing. Yeah. So, but there was also time for a short while when people and politicians in Sweden think that now we are safe, yeah. Now it's the eternal peace, or we will have no tensions here.
Yeah, that we are slowly
but I also want to say that we don't feel threatened in any way. We don't feel that. So I don't talk about threats, I talk about things that have happened as a reality. Georgia, Crimea, the war going on in Ukraine, all these sort of things.
Yeah. I wonder maybe whether you can provide us a little bit of context. I understand you had a meeting yesterday with Secretary Mattis, and you'd signed an agreement, or you agreed on a cooperation agreement there. Maybe you can give us a bit of context of your trip here.
The background to that is, if I go back to when we worked in the Defense Commission before 2000, we finished that work in spring 2014. I think we worked with it 2.5 years or something. And in that report, and there were representatives from all political parties in the parliament. In that report, we were very clear about that one part of our strategy for the future should be to deepening defense cooperation with other countries and organizations. And we were very clear that we should have a strong transatlantic link. And we were very clear also around that we should deepening the cooperation with Finland. And we signed a statement of intent with the United States 2016. And that was about interoperability, military exercises, research, material, and international operations. Finland also signed a statement of intent. So we have two similar statements of intent. And then when we exercise in our part of Europe, we often have troops from Finland and Sweden together, but also other countries, and the United States is often one of them. Mm-hmm. And we think that if we have the same position, it's easier for both of us if we coordinate and also have a trilateral agreement and also build some sort of group that can follow up the things we are doing together and also create new ideas. So that is a very important platform now for the future. So I think we can work more effective now than we have done before. So we are stepping forward with this.
I wonder if I could ask you a question here that is slightly political. We've seen in Korea that in both Koreas that this administration, the Trump administration, has injected a degree of uncertainty, and in Korea it had so far at least positive effect that the countries seem to be trying to resolve their conflict. Just yesterday, the Iran agreement, the United States pulled out. How do you think this administration is affecting European stability?
If I talk from my own experience, I can say that when we signed the first agreement with Ashton Carter, that was, we have worked with it before, and we have done on that time a lot of things together. Then we continued with activities, and we developed activities. And when Mattis was elected as Secretary of Defense, we could see that everything we done before had continued. So it was no change in the position. And I cannot say that I cannot see any difference here. And my feeling and our impression is in the relationship to Pentagon and to Mattis, that is stability. Then all the other things that happen in U.S. policy and with Twitter and everything, that's another question. Our relationship directly with Pentagon and armed forces here, I feel stability in that.
I see. Excellent. You mentioned Twitter there, and I think Sweden, also in the course of the campaign, occasionally, was in the news in the United States, and for a lot of people, a few questions popped up, especially in the context of right-wing activism, possibly even neo-Nazis in Sweden. And I just wondered whether you could sort of briefly, for an audience that is not as well familiar with that issue, with the news coverage in Sweden itself, just speak briefly to. I'm asking because this is a subject that is, acutely of interest in the United States right now, but also in many different European countries. So I wondered, how does the issue of free speech, the internet, and more extremist currents in Swedish politics, how does that play out 4 months ahead of the election in Sweden?
I think that social media are used by extremist groups, also used by foreign interests that want to intervene in the Swedish society and in the political environment and make an impact. So I think that that is a reality that exists. And I think that we also see actors that are trying to use this in a way to undermine politicians and undermine specific persons that they think are a threat or a bad man or bad woman or something. Yeah. I can take one example from my own situation. In the beginning of 2015, there was a fake letter produced about a weapon that a Swedish company sold weapon to Ukraine, and I have signed that letter, that fake letter. I've taken my autograph from another document, and it was a congratulation to that company. And this was a way to undermine my position. And we saw this immediately. And in the Swedish media and in the Swedish environment, we could stop this rumor and this impression of that I have signed this letter. But it's not so easy to do it on the international arena. Yeah. So that's one example of many examples how different actors work for undermining people and to spread disinformation.
Yeah. That's exactly why I was asking that question, just for context. The internal fissures in Western societies are, of course, vulnerabilities that can be exploited in active measures. But you mentioned that letter. It's a very old-school Soviet tactic to forge letters. How was it done? Was it well done in terms of its tradecraft?
Yeah, it was our official paper from the ministry, and then it was ordinary congratulation letter, and then they have taken my autograph from a document in the parliament. So we find the original document.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And so what we have here, I think in Sweden as well as in many other Western democracies right now, is probably an increased vulnerability to these kinds of tactics again, and at the same time, predominantly Russia using these tactics in order to drive wedges into our conflicts. So how is Sweden, and I understand that in exactly 4 months you will have a general election in Sweden, how is Sweden preparing for the threat that is arguably already underway of disinformation and influence operations?
first of all, I think that there is an ongoing strategy and activity toward many European countries that the goal is to split them, to show that there is splits in the society and stimulate that different groups come in a clash with each other, and the goal is to make the society weaker, and to show that our way of having democracy is not a good way, and deteriorating the society. That's one thing. Then the election now, we have seen in France, we have seen in Germany, United States is a world example. We have seen that sort of interference and disturbing activities. And I should not say that Sweden can be out of it. We have prepared for it with different authorities that will follow up if we can clearly see that there is activities. And then we have to make the decision how to handle it. Maybe we will make it public, or I don't know yet, but we will follow these activities. And we have also, that will not be existing in the election campaign, but we have also decided to build a state authority for psychological defense.
Mm-hmm. State authority for psychological defense. Can you be a little more specific what that means, what that is?
That can be a competence center that follow up with other operations ongoing that have the goal to deteriorate the society, or the state actors involved. Is there a strategy that we can see very clearly that is existing? But also an authority responsible for basic information to the Swedish people, the citizens in Sweden, about basic things, how to handle a conflict situation, for example, a crisis situation, so people have some authority that they can rely on. So we minimize with rumors and disinformation and the possibility for other actors to intervene in a very negative way.
Yeah, yeah.
But this also, we must also have a trust for the authorities who are going to do this. So we must work with this in a very serious way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder if I could be a little more specific with a question here. Around the time of the Munich Security Conference this year, so in February, I don't know whether you were at the Munich Security Conference as well. You may recall the United States called out Russia for organizing and executing a significant cyber attack in Ukraine that was known under NotPetya. And several European countries, including Denmark, including Estonia, joined the United States in pointing out that this is a Russian operation. I believe there were also Swedish companies affected by the operation, but I'm not sure. I think so. So the question that I would have is, what are Sweden's capabilities in detecting some of these high-tech, cyber attacks, and potentially joining the United States and the United Kingdom, the two countries that are leading here, in calling out adversaries?
We are working all the time to defend ourselves and to develop our defense systems. We have different companies that meet on a regular basis, also state authorities who do the same, and under leadership of one of our state authorities to share information and share experience, and also share how can we develop our systems so we are better to defend us. So this is an ongoing work all the time. Then we have also a decision in the parliament that we should develop active cyber. And
what does active cyber mean?
yeah, I would not go into that, but it's we develop it in a military organization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds scary.
I think you work with that also in the United States.
Yeah, we do, I think.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. This event is headed security in the Baltic Sea, headlined as security in the Baltic Sea context. And I wonder whether I could draw the conversation for a moment to actual naval questions of naval security in the Baltic Sea. The Baltic Sea isn't considered as uncontested anymore as it once was, and I wonder what Sweden's policy is when it comes to Baltic Sea security.
Our policy is directly connected to what's happening in our neighborhood. And what we have decided is to upgrade our military capabilities from a national point of view. And we invest more than $3 billion until 2020. And some examples is investment in next generation of jet fighters, procurement of 2 new submarines. We are also now in a process to procure ground-based air defense systems to renew the old ones and buy new ones. We have also reactivated conscription service. And that's one part of the policy. The other part is to deepening the relations on bilateral and multilateral platform with other countries and organizations. And then we have worked a lot with Finland. That's our deepest partner. And then we have very close to the Baltic republics. We have a very close connection to Poland. We have agreements with Germany, the Nordic countries, Great Britain, and United States. So we have worked a lot with the development of international contacts, and the result of this is more of exercises together, more of interoperability, and all these activities create a higher threshold and create stability in our part of Europe.
And, well, I mean, historically, the exercises can also sometimes be obviously misunderstood. In the 80s, that major examples come to mind here with Able Archer. I just wonder whether you can be a little more specific on the assessment of how useful some of the exercises. I believe Aurora was a particularly important one.
We have September last year we had a big exercise called Aurora with around 20,000 soldiers. We exercised with Army, Air Force, and Navy together.
Yeah.
And we exercised in a brigade format, and we also had around 40 civilian authorities involved. It was a total defense dimension there. The scenario was defense of Sweden, and our exercises always have the goal of defending ourselves directly connected to the right to defend the sovereignty of the country. And that is also something that are directly connected to the UN Charter, that you have the right to self-defense. And if you have that as a platform, I can hardly see that anybody should feel threatened by it. Then you can make propaganda around it if you want, but we are only interested in the defense of Sweden and stability in our part of Europe, and that's our goal.
Yeah. So you're a social democrat. You were, if I understand this correctly, not always only friendly towards NATO. We all change our opinions. But I wondered whether you could give us a little bit of a sense for example, in Germany, you would have a similar situation. Whether you could give us a little bit of a sense for how the question of Swedish neutrality, which obviously has changed a lot and with various NATO agreements in place, may not be in place any longer. What would Swedish population think about NATO today? How much of a controversial subject is NATO in Sweden? I'm asking
I think we have a broad majority among the Swedish people for the position we have now, and that position is, as I said, upgrading of national capabilities in combination with deepening cooperation with other countries, and we are member of the partnership and enhanced opportunity program. And a lot has changed since the Cold War. Now we are members of the European Union, for example. And after that, we say that we are military non-allied, but we don't talk about neutrality. So military non-allied is the position we have today. And in the Lisbon Treaty, there is also a demand that if something happened to another European Union state, you have also to be ready to help in some way. And when we have this terrorist attack in Paris, we afterwards delivered different sort of help to France. And it was many countries in the European Union that did the same. And we can hardly see, and that was very clear also in the Defense Commission's report 2014 that I talked about before, that we can hardly see that if something happened in one country in our neighborhood, that only will be something for that country. We will be involved in some way, all of us. So, but what to do, I don't know, because we talk about hypothetical situations, but it have a direct effect on whole the area. So I think that if we in this new security environment should have any strategy, so it is upgrading our capability in combination with these corporations. And then the interoperability possibility is very important, because if you exercise and create interoperability, also you can use that skills or that what you have done, you can use it in a crisis situation easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe what I would do is maybe ask one more question, and then we can open to the audience, so you can now start thinking about your own questions. The question that I would ask is, again, somewhat political, but I think in this day and age, where we again have the conversation about active measures and influence operations, some of these political divisions, while they're being actively exploited, are just a more important subject in a defense and security setting like this again. So in many European countries, what you find, and this would apply, I think in France, it would apply in Germany, it would apply even to a degree in the UK, you have at the fringes, at the political fringes on the far left, as well as on the far right, the most pro-Russian forces today, people who, I think in Germany you recently had a delegation of the Alternative für Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, sort of a fringe right party visit Crimea. Does something like this exist in Sweden as well?
The links we can see is on the far right. There is links there, and that has also been public in newspapers. Some of these try to hide these links, but they are existing. And during the Cold War, we had on the left side the communists. They have direct support from Soviet Union, but now it's very far right groups that we can see, and that's the same in France, for example, with the National Front.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite an extraordinary historical shift and flip there. Maybe I could ask the audience to come in with questions as well. Yeah, here, right there in the front. Sure. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely.
I think that armed forces in Sweden all the time must work with value questions. And this UN Resolution 1325 is a very important part of the education of soldiers. We also have a gender center, an international gender center in the Swedish Armed Forces. We invite representatives from armed forces in different countries all over the world for education. And I think that many of these countries they really value the possibility to come to our gender center. And that gender center is also part, they have an excellence level connected directly to NATO. So this is very important topics in the Swedish Armed Forces.
The gentleman.
You know, now we have conscription the first year, and in the conscription service we also have these elements and these dimensions. Yeah.
I have a lot of questions here, so why don't we take two, and we have the three gentlemen right here in the front row, and why don't we start with the gentleman in the light shirt?
Thank you, sir. Great to see you. John Heffern, recently retired from the Foreign Service, now teaching at Georgetown. It's a little school out west. You might have heard of it. It's a friend and partner of SAIS. Real quick.
We haven't heard of it.
The question about the Baltics. The RAND exercise, and we've done exercises in our class at Georgetown, which show how difficult it is to reinforce the Balts from the south in the event of Russian aggression in the Baltics, because of the A2AD and Kaliningrad and the Iskanders and all that stuff. Permanent presence in the Balts, which is the RAND answer, is also controversial politically. The easy answer is reinforced from the north. Hypothetically speaking, would the big partner, friendly, capable country that's between Norway and the Balts allow reinforcement to the Balts in the event of Russian aggression in that region?
It's impossible for me to speculate what we will do if there are that sort of things that you, a scenario will happen. What we do, and that is what I tried to explain here before, is to build interoperability so we can do something if something happened. And it's also a way to prevent that nothing should happen. What we have done that have a direct impact on the Baltic countries is to now invest in a new regiment, a battle group on the island of Gotland, with a tank company and a mechanized company and air defense systems. And we will also do more on the island of Gotland in the future, but we must start somewhere. And we will have an inauguration of a new regiment there 21st of May. But the control of Gotland has a direct impact on the Baltics and on Finland and on the Swedish mainland. We had a lot of military representation there during the Cold War, but most of it was withdrawn after. But now we have invested again. So that has a direct impact in peacetime.
Take that as a yes.
Question? Yes, please, sir. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Dinas Butners, and I'm also a recent Georgetown graduate. So thank you so much to SAIS for your hospitality. My question is this. I disagree with the professor's comment that the Baltic Sea is an uncontested sea. April 4th, a month ago now, the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet out of Kaliningrad launched live-fire missile tests along Latvia's economic zone, not far from Gotland Island. The tests actually greatly impacted civilian air traffic for at least 3 days, greatly impacting the trafficability of the Baltic Sea. My question to you is this. What is Sweden, or at least the Sweden population's view of the Russian naval activity in the Baltic Sea? Thank you.
There have been more of activities and more of exercises in the Baltic Sea area. And that's also a reason why we invest in military capabilities. And I think that as I said before, we have a broad support for our decisions, a broad majority in the parliament for it, and I think it's supported by the public opinion in Sweden. Then a lot of things happened. From time to time, we have they fly very provocative with aircrafts, very close to sea vessels, very close to other aircraft. So that's another example. You have you describe it in a correct way when you say that they request for closure of airspace, and they have done it twice now. And it was also an area directly outside Sweden in our fly information region. So these are things that happen, and they can do it connected to international regulations. So it's not illegal, if we say so, but it's also a way to show some sort of, send some sort of signal, if we say like that. But so there are more of activity, and we have we see that, and we try to act. And I also noticed that we from time to time have American sea vessels in the area, and maybe that can have a direct impact on the balance in the Baltic Sea region.
Thank you, sir.
We have another question here in the front.
My name is Mike Hultqvist. I'm from here at SAIS. Thank you for coming. I'd like to continue this line of inquiry with regard to NATO. I would point out that, especially since the Russian ambassador to Sweden in the past has directly threatened your country with war if you would join NATO, what I'm about to say I think is relevant.
I think it was Denmark.
No, they did it to Sweden also. But I think it's important to point out that at the most recent OSCE summit in Astana in December 2010, all 57 participating states, including the Russian Federation, signed a commemorative statement saying specifically that every country has the right to choose its own defense, including whether or not to join an alliance. Dmitry Medvedev signed on the dotted line, and I think it's worth reminding people that. My question about NATO is the following. I understand the article from the Lisbon Treaty with the EU, but I think most military people would say that that's hardly comparable to Article 5 guarantee from NATO. And that brings up the question of possible Swedish membership in NATO. The question I would ask has to do with your relationship with Finland, which you mentioned a few times. Back in 1995, when Sweden decided to join the European Union, it made its decision independently and essentially notified Finland about this. More recently, there's been more coordination between your countries, very close coordination. But public opinion seems out of phase. I mean, when support for NATO goes up in Finland, it seems to go down in Sweden. When it goes up in Sweden, it goes down in Finland. I've seen 3 polls in the last couple of years in Sweden where pluralities have come out in favor of membership, but not so much in Finland. My question is very simple. Are you coordinating so closely with Finland that any possible decision on NATO membership would have to be made by both countries before either one would act?
First of all, I don't think it's a topic in Finland or in Sweden to go into NATO, to apply for NATO membership. I don't think it's a main topic on the political agenda, and I don't think that the government in Finland are ready to take that sort of steps, and we have no ambition from the Swedish side to do it. We coordinate with Finland in a deep way, and I think that we need to, when we are discussing security policy and security doctrine and what we should do in the future, I think it's very important to discuss these sort of important questions directly together, because it has a direct impact. So I think also with the deep we now have in the defense cooperation, it's necessary to have this sort of dialogue. But I think we are on the same level now, that the strategy is to upgrade capability and deepen cooperation with other countries and organizations. And to deepening this cooperation and do it in practice is a long-term process also. It's more than one or two exercises. It's something that must going on all the time in different dimensions and different levels. And I think that what we are doing now, Finland and Sweden, without changing the security doctrine, it builds security in our part of Europe. If we will open up for, now we're going to change the security doctrine, then we open up also for instability for a while, and we open up for referendum situations. We don't know what will happen in that situation. So I think the wisest thing we can do if the goal is stability in the long term is to do what we are doing today, upgrading and cooperate with others, build interoperability, and in that way also have a very clear signal that we have no ambition to change the security doctrine, but we are also open with our partnership with NATO, that we exercise together, that we have a close relationship. But so I think we have found the balance that fit for our two countries just now. And we should also know that Finland have a very long border. That's also reality, and I have a lot of experience of that. That can be.
Excellent. Yeah. Konstantinos, right here in front, one of our students.
Thank you for being here. My name is Konstantinos Konstantinos. I come from Greece and I'm a graduating student here at SAIS. I have two short questions. First, if you could share your thoughts on the Nord Stream 2 project and the implications for the security on Baltic Sea. Secondly, a couple of days ago, there were a couple of reports published by the aviationist regarding increased Swedish activity in Eastern Mediterranean, basically using electronic warfare aircraft. If you could expand on that and explain what are your thoughts on Russian presence in Syria, and if the tactics and methods used there could be applied also in the Baltic Sea in a possible scenario. Thank you.
The last question.
Well, the last question, whether tactics that are employed in Syria could be transferred to the Baltic Sea?
If we start with this Nord Stream 2 question, Nord Stream will not go into Swedish territorial water. It will go in economical zone. That means that we cannot, from a political point of view, say no. We cannot say no, because if it is in our territorial water, we can do it. But an economical zone, it's only a question of is this in compliance with the international regulations, and are they following the rules that are valid on an international level. It's Denmark and Germany that have it in territorial water directly now. And what I've heard then is that Chancellor Merkel have said that this is not any longer only a commercial project, it's also a commercial political project. And then they also want to have some sort of solution of for Ukraine if they lose something, if they build Nord Stream 2. And what that means we will see in the future. Then there is also activities in the European Commission to see how to handle this project. So I think we cannot stop it, because we are directly connected to these international rules and regulations. But we see what's happening in European Union and in Germany now. That's very important. Then if I will go into this question about Russian tactics, it will be too much speculative for me to, it's too speculative for me to discuss openly. So if you say like this, we prepare and we exercise and we have a clear view of what can happen in what we think could be a crisis. But to go into this in a public discussion, I think that's not my role. Maybe a think tank can do it.
We have two questions there in the back. Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Minister. My name is Paul Cole. I'm a SAIS grad. 28 years ago, I defended my dissertation here at SAIS. The topic of my dissertation was U.S.-Swedish security relations. And you may recall that dissertation prompted something called the Commission on the Policy of Neutrality, Neutralitetspolitikkommissionen. And two of the findings from my work going back...
You could keep your question relatively
Yes, it's
concise,
short.
that would
It's
be
short.
great, yeah.
Here it comes. Two of the findings from that era was that Swedish policy on nuclear weapons was anti-nuclear weapons, but Sweden's operational policy was assuming that Sweden was covered by the U.S. nuclear umbrella. And I'm wondering if those two positions have changed. Anti-nuclear weapons, but depending on the United States for nuclear deterrence. Thank you.
Very interesting questions, and I think there are many different histories about how was it during that time and what was reality or not. I should not go into that. Traditionally, we have tried to work on the international arena against nuclear weapons, and the main agreement that we support is the NPT, and that will be a conference here now 2020. And I think that that is a very important conference because there we have representation from most of the nuclear weapon countries, and we also see in our neighborhood exercises and investments in nuclear weapons. I think it's important to have a profile where we work against these weapon systems, but they are also in some sort of international balance. And from time to time, we hear from, for example, the Russian side that they inform us about that you should know that we have nuclear weapons. And that's interesting to hear. So I think that this NPT conference 2020, and we will work hard for that, that will be very important.
We have another question right there in the middle. Yes, right here.
My name is Alexander Pandea. I have a question about the sale of economic assets to potential adversary countries. So we've seen in the U.S. that there have been governmental action against mergers and acquisitions of by Chinese companies, and there have been some efforts by Russian companies to buy ports and such things in Sweden. I was wondering what your opinion is on that.
We make research about how to change legislation in Sweden so we can, in a better way, control ownership of strategical infrastructure, ports, airfields, railway stations, infrastructure systems. So it's a very important question you raise, and I think that many countries need to upgrade its rules and regulations around this. We can also see that they have the same situation in Finland, but we have to modernize our system.
Yes, sir.
John Galindo, SAIS alum also. Brief context and two quick questions. I come from a country with a president who's running for a fourth term illegally, with enormous help from Russia, from China, closing up previously with Ahmadinejad and now with Lukashenko, among other allies. Clearly, psychological, symbolic, and traditional media warfare is now being complemented with cyber warfare. We've been documenting for 7 years the way this process has gone about systematically. Question number one, is there a specific unit or organization within the Swedish Defense Ministry that we can share our information and our experience with? And second question, Sweden is very well known as a very progressive, forward-looking country. Is there an active effort in investing in cyber peacemaking as opposed to cyber warfare?
I think about cooperation between our authorities and organizations or actors in other countries, that's decisions that must be made very carefully. And I think different sort of cooperation exists also. But it must be made in the authorities, and some of these decisions must also have some sort of connection to the government. If I should, it's not so easy to answer the first question, because we must be very clear about the details and what we are cooperating around. So that's a hinder for me to go further in this answer. Then the second question, can you repeat it short?
Cyber warfare.
Yeah, it's to defend the systems is very important, and I think that is directly connected to peacemaking, because if we can build hinders from attacking our system and affect them, then we also show that we want peace here. So I will turn it around to that.
So we have time for one more quick question right there in the back.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jeff Price. I teach here at SAIS. I have a question about Sweden's undersea warfare capability program, both offensive and defensive. Sweden has demonstrated an impressive air-independent propulsion program for submarines, and Sweden has also reportedly been had some issues with submarines penetrating Swedish territorial waters, which raised the issue of anti-submarine warfare capabilities and whether there's an opportunity for improving capabilities there.
We produce submarines in Sweden, and we have done it for a very long time, and we have the intention to do it also in the future. And now we have procured 2 new submarines, the next generation called A26, and it's special designed for the special type of water we have in the Baltic Sea, but it's also special designed for operations in our archipelago. And I think that connected to our environment, this is the best submarines in the world. It's world top class. Now I sound like a salesman, but I think this is real fact. Then we are now investing also in the Navy, in sensors and in different sort of capabilities for hunting submarines or underwater movements. So we have this as a priority, and there is also a background behind why we are doing this. So that is the situation. We think that this is important, and it's also part of the defense decision in the parliament.
Excellent. So please join me in thanking Minister Hultqvist for coming today and for answering so many questions with political foresight and context, as well as attention to detail. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.